There are rules in warfare that cannot be broken. One of them is this: you cannot defeat an empire with 300 men, not when that empire has spent 3 centuries carving the world into pieces and placing its flag on every coastline it desired, not when that empire built the most experienced military machine in human history, not when that empire looked at your island, your small, sun-baked Mediterranean island, and saw nothing but a useful base, a strategic dot on a map, a place that existed to serve their purposes and nothing more. The British Empire in 1954 operated on a simple assumption. Cyprus was theirs. It had been theirs since 1878, and it would remain theirs for as long as they required it. The math was not complicated. Britain garrisoned the island with tens of thousands of trained soldiers. They had armored vehicles, aircraft, intelligence networks, detention camps, and the full weight of a global superpower behind them. Cyprus had mountains, olive trees, and a population of just over 500,000 people: farmers, merchants, priests, and shepherds. When Cypriot leaders formally requested self-determination in 1954, the British response came from Minister of State for Colonial Affairs Henry Hopkinson. He stood in the House of Commons and told Parliament that Cyprus was one of those territories that could never expect to be granted full independence. Never. Not now. Not in 50 years. Not ever. The word he used was never. In London, it barely made the news. Britain had crushed rebellions before, in Palestine, in Malaya, in Kenya. They had the tools, the experience, and the absolute certainty that a small Mediterranean island full of farmers could not threaten one of the most powerful militaries on Earth. What they didn't know was that a 56-year-old man had already returned to Cyprus in secret, that he had spent years planning, that he had a network of cells already built, targets already chosen, and a strategy designed around the one weapon Britain had no answer for. His name was Georgios Grivas, and on the 1st of April, 1955, he proved that never is a very dangerous word. Grivas was born in 1897 in Trikomo, a small village in northeastern Cyprus. He grew up in a world defined by one word: enosis, union with Greece. The belief, shared by the overwhelming majority of Greek Cypriots, that their island, Greek in language, Greek in Orthodox faith, Greek in culture for 3,000 years, did not belong under a British flag. He left Cyprus young, enrolled in the Hellenic Military Academy in Athens, and spent 4 decades building a military career. He fought in the First World War. He survived the catastrophic Greco-Turkish War of 1919 to 1922, watching Greece fight everything it had and still lose an entire civilization on the shores of Asia Minor. He commanded a division in October 1940 when Mussolini's Italy invaded Greece, the campaign the world called the Greek Miracle, when a small nation threw a fascist army back into the mountains of Albania and stunned the world. By the time the Second World War ended, Grivas had learned one lesson above all others. Diplomacy without force behind it is simply begging. He was not the only one working towards Cypriot independence. Archbishop Makarios III, charismatic, politically brilliant, the spiritual and political leader of the Greek Cypriot people, believed in taking the case to the world, to the United Nations, to international opinion. In 1950, he organized a plebiscite. Over 95% of Greek Cypriots voted for union with Greece. Britain ignored it. Grivas and Makarios understood each other. Makarios would work the diplomatic channels. Grivas would make sure Britain understood the cost of saying no. In 1951, Grivas made his first secret visit to Cyprus. He did not come as a tourist. He walked the Troodos Mountains, the rugged range forming the spine of the island, rising nearly 2,000 meters, dense with black pine and cedar, cut through with ravines and narrow paths. He studied the terrain the way a surgeon studies an anatomy. He identified safe houses, escape routes, supply lines, hiding places. He returned to Athens and wrote an operational plan he called anorthosis, reconstruction, a detailed blueprint for a guerrilla campaign against British military and government targets, structured in cells of 3 to 5 men, each knowing only their own unit. Classic underground design, drawn from the resistance movements of the Second World War. If one cell was captured, they could not betray the others. They did not know the others. He called the organization EOKA, Ethniική Οργάνωση Κυπρίων Αγωνιστών, the National Organization of Cypriot Struggle. His fighters were young. Many were teenagers, sons of farmers and merchants who had grown up hearing a gnosis in church, at school, around the dinner table. They were not trained soldiers. They were Cypriots who had decided that their generation would be the one to end it. By late 1954, Grivas slipped back into Cyprus for the last time, arriving by night on a small boat on the northern coast. No customs, no border check, no record. British intelligence had no idea he was on the island. He moved through safe houses in Nicosia, issued final orders, and set the date. He chose April 1st deliberately, not for the English joke, though he was aware of the symbolism. The timing gave him the final weeks to complete preparations, with the mountain paths passable after winter, and the nights still long enough for movement under cover of darkness. He issued a proclamation to be distributed the morning after the first strikes. It read, "We call upon you to show by your deeds that a soul-breathing freedom can break the chains of slavery." On the night of March 31st, 1955, he gave the final order. April 1st, 1955, 12 minutes past midnight. Across Cyprus, simultaneously, the night tears open. The British Secretariat building in Nicosia, the administrative heart of colonial rule, shakes as an explosion rips through its walls. At the exact same moment, the Wolseley Barracks radio transmitter goes dark. Government buildings in Famagusta, Larnaca, and Limassol erupt. In one coordinated strike, across an entire island, EOKA announces its existence to the world. Not with a petition, not with a protest, with synchronized explosions detonated at exactly the same moment from one end of Cyprus to the other. British officers stumble from their quarters into the smoky Nicosia night. The damage is manageable. What is not manageable is the implication. Someone has been organizing inside Cyprus for months, possibly years, and British intelligence missed every single sign of it. There is a network here, a command structure, a plan, and whoever is running it just demonstrated they can strike anywhere on the island simultaneously. Grivas is sleeping in a safe house 3 miles from British headquarters. He wakes to confirmation that every target was hit. He writes one line in his diary that morning: "We have begun." He has a name for himself inside the resistance, Digenis, after a legendary Byzantine hero, the warrior who guarded the frontiers of the empire, the man who fought giants and never yielded. It is not a modest choice. Grivas is telling the British exactly what kind of man they are dealing with. Governor Sir Robert Armitage declares a state of emergency within days. Security forces flood the streets. They are looking for the man behind the bombings. They have no name, no photograph, no location, no description, beyond rumors passed between frightened informers who know almost nothing. EOKA escalates through April and May. ambushes on British patrols in the Troodos foothills, sabotage of military vehicles and supply lines, bomb attacks on police stations in Nicosia and Famagusta. Grivas is running a textbook guerrilla campaign. Strike, disappear, strike again, somewhere else. Never hold ground. Never fight a pitched battle. Be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The British bring in a new governor. Field Marshal Sir John Harding, one of Britain's most decorated soldiers, the man who crushed the Mau Mau insurgency in Kenya, a counterinsurgency specialist trusted with Britain's hardest problems. London is no longer treating this as a policing matter. They are sending their best. Harding arrives in October 1955 with a clear mandate: find Grivas, destroy EOKA, restore order. He increases the garrison steadily toward 40,000 troops. He introduces collective punishment. Villages suspected of sheltering EOKA fighters are surrounded at dawn, searched house by house, their men dragged into the streets and held for interrogation. He declares curfews across large parts of the island. He offers a reward of £10,000, an extraordinary sum in 1955, for information leading to the capture of Grivas. Nobody claims it. This is the thing the British cannot understand. EOKA's greatest weapon is not explosives. It is not ambushes. It is silence. The silence of an entire population that has decided collectively that it will not cooperate. Farmers who see EOKA fighters moving through the hills at dusk and say nothing to the soldiers who ask the next morning. Priests who pass messages hidden inside prayer books between villages. Women who carry weapons and ammunition beneath their clothing through British checkpoints, smiling pleasantly at the soldiers who wave them through. School children who act as lookouts, positioned on rooftops and corners, signaling the approach of British patrols with predetermined codes. A certain way of kicking a ball, a particular window shutter left open. The entire civilian population is the resistance, and Harding has no way to fight that without turning every Greek Cypriot on the island into an enemy, which is exactly what begins to happen. In November 1955, Harding opens the Kokinotrimithia detention camp, a facility for holding suspected EOKA members and sympathizers without trial. It will not be the last. Over the course of the conflict, thousands of Greek Cypriots will pass through detention camps, held on suspicion, interrogated with methods that will later be described by the European Commission on Human Rights as torture. Beatings, stress positions, sleep deprivation, forced standing for hours in the fierce Cypriot sun. The brutality does not break EOKA. It feeds it. Every man who enters a detention camp and returns to his village carries something with him. Not just physical marks, rage, and rage is the most effective recruiting tool in the world. Grivas watches this from his safe houses and mountain hideouts, and he understands it perfectly. Every British overreaction is a gift. Every collective punishment pushes more young men toward the movement. He does not need to convince Greek Cypriots that their cause is just. The British are doing that for him. In the spring of 1956, Harding makes the decision that will define the entire conflict. Archbishop Makarios, the political leader of the movement, the man pursuing a diplomatic solution in parallel, the one figure who represented any possibility of a negotiated settlement, is arrested at Nicosia airport and deported to the Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. Makarios was the moderate voice, the bridge between the political and military wings of the independence movement, the man who, in private communications, had been urging Grivas to show restraint, to leave open the possibility of a negotiated end. By removing him, Britain eliminates the only figure who might have brought Grivas to a table. Instead of weakening the movement, the deportation unites every Greek Cypriot on the island in fury. EOKA's recruitment surges overnight. Grivas responds with an intensified campaign. His fighters are now striking in the cities, in the mountains, and along the roads simultaneously. The operations are more sophisticated, more coordinated, more deadly. British soldiers are dying in ambushes that materialize from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. Bombs detonate beneath military vehicles on roads that were clear and safe an hour before. Snipers fire from positions that, when searched, contain nothing but a spent cartridge and a window with a view. And still, through all of it, they cannot find Grivas. Here is what makes him extraordinary as a commander. In 4 years of intense British effort, with 40,000 soldiers, with informer networks, with mass detentions and coercive interrogations, they will come agonizingly close to capturing him exactly twice. The first time is the summer of 1956. British forces, acting on the best intelligence they have received since the conflict began, surround a farmhouse in the Troodos foothills. They have the building fully encircled. Soldiers in position on every exit. They move in at dawn. Grivas is gone. He left 4 hours earlier. He would write in his diary that he sensed the net closing and trusted his instincts. His diary maintained throughout the entire campaign a detailed running account of every operation, every near miss, every intelligence failure by the British, is one of the most remarkable documents to emerge from any guerrilla campaign of the 20th century. The British find the diary, not the man. The diary, they read it with a combination of fury and, though they would never admit this in any official document, something very close to admiration. The man they are hunting has been writing down everything: his tactics, his frustrations, his contempt for British military intelligence, his analysis of why their search operations keep failing. He is so certain they will never catch him that he is keeping a written record of how he is defeating them. They publish portions of the diary to embarrass him. It backfires. Greek Cypriots read the diary and see a commander who is brilliant, disciplined, and completely unafraid. His legend grows larger. By 1957, Harding is replaced. The British government, under increasing pressure from its own parliament and from international opinion, sends a new governor, Sir Hugh Foote, a diplomat rather than a soldier, a man whose instinct is negotiation rather than force. His arrival signals something important. Britain is beginning to look for a way out that doesn't look like surrender. But Grivas is not finished. Through 1957 and into 1958, the campaign continues. EOKA fighters carry out operations in Nicosia, Famagusta, Kyrenia, and Limassol. British soldiers patrol in armored vehicles now. The open jeep has proven too vulnerable to ambush. Roadblocks appear across every major route on the island. Whole neighborhoods in Nicosia are sealed and searched. The island looks, to any outside observer, like an occupied territory, which, Grivas notes in his diary, is precisely the point. Because every photograph of British soldiers pointing weapons at Cypriot civilians, every report of a detention camp, every account of collective punishment reaches newspapers in Washington, Paris, New York, and Ottawa. Britain's NATO allies are watching. The United States, deeply uncomfortable with a democracy conducting what looks increasingly like colonial repression in the middle of the Cold War. At a time when it is trying to win the loyalty of newly independent nations across Africa and Asia, is applying quiet but persistent pressure on London. Britain is not just losing the military campaign, it is losing the argument. The second near capture comes in late 1958. Acting on their most reliable intelligence of the entire conflict, British forces launch a massive sweep operation in the Troodos Mountains. Helicopters hover over the pine forests. Ground troops form cordons stretching for miles. They have identified, with unusual precision, an area containing Grivas's command position. They find his camp. The fire is still warm. A half-eaten meal on the table. Papers, maps, evidence of a command post recently and hastily abandoned. Grivas is already in Limassol, in a house belonging to a schoolteacher whose name the British will never learn. He writes in his diary that evening, "They were close this time, not close enough." By early 1959, something extraordinary is happening in the corridors of power in London that would have been unimaginable 4 years earlier. The British government is quietly, privately, in meetings that will not be declassified for decades, beginning to accept what Grivas has always known. They cannot win this. Not militarily, not politically, not at any cost that Britain is willing to pay. If stories like this matter to you, stories that never made it into the textbooks, we'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and hit that like button. These moments of defiance shaped history, but they're buried in archives. Your subscription helps us dig them out and bring them into the light. The negotiations that follow are long, complex, and deeply imperfect. The talks take place in Zurich and London through early 1959, involving Britain, Greece, Turkey, and Cypriot representatives. The outcome is not enosis, not the union with Greece that Grivas and EOKA had fought for, that 95% of Greek Cypriots had voted for in 1950, that the movement had always declared as its ultimate goal. Instead, Cyprus will become an independent republic, a compromise that satisfies no one completely and everyone partially. Makarios, released from his Seychelles exile, will return to Cyprus as its first president. Britain will retain 2 sovereign base areas, Akrotiri and Dekilia, carved out of the island's territory, military installations that remain British to this day. Grivas opposes this bitterly. The bases are, in his view, a concession too far. He wanted the British gone entirely. Not present on 98% of the island, while retaining military bases on the rest. He makes his objections known. With characteristic force, he is overruled. But on August 16, 1960, the Republic of Cyprus is officially proclaimed. The British flag comes down over Government House in Nicosia. 40,000 soldiers, the same 40,000 that were supposed to make resistance impossible, that were supposed to make Grivas's 300 fighters irrelevant, board ships and aircraft and leave. Think about what that means in the full sweep of British imperial history. In 3 centuries of colonial rule, spanning every continent on Earth, Britain had faced countless uprisings, rebellions, and independence movements. Very few of them had forced a British withdrawal through guerrilla pressure alone on an island with no outside sanctuary, no neighboring country providing weapons or safe haven, no foreign sponsor. EOKA achieved this with 300 fighters against one of the greatest military powers in human history. The ripple effects reach far beyond Cyprus itself. In the years that follow, British colonial administrators across Africa and Asia look at what happened on that small Mediterranean island and recalibrate their assumptions. If 40,000 troops cannot pacify a population of 500,000 people who have collectively decided they will not submit, what does that mean everywhere else? The answer, as the 1960s unfold, becomes clear. It means everything. British Somaliland, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Tanganyika, Uganda, Kenya, Zanzibar, Malawi, Zambia, one by one through the early 1960s, Britain grants independence to its remaining African colonies. The age of the British Empire, already weakened by the Second World War, accelerates toward its final end. Cyprus was not the only cause, but Cyprus was a proof of concept. It demonstrated at great cost and in unmistakable terms that the era of saying never to a people who wanted to govern themselves was over. Grivas is flown secretly out of Cyprus on a Greek Air Force plane in March 1959, months before independence is formally declared. He leaves the same way he arrived, in darkness, in secret, without ceremony. He is not present for the celebrations. He does not stand in the crowd on the day the British flag comes down over Government House. He had always said the struggle was not about him. George Grivas lived until January 27, 1974. He was 76 years old. He did not live to see the catastrophe of that summer, the coup d'état backed by the Greek military junta against Makarios, the Turkish military intervention that followed, the division of Cyprus along lines that remain carved into the island to this day. An island where, in the north, towns and villages once inhabited by Greek Cypriots stand empty, where houses sit locked exactly as their owners left them on the day they fled in July 1974 and never returned. That story belongs to a different chapter, a darker one. The chapter that belongs to Grivas and to EOKA and to the 300 fighters who took on an empire is written simply in this. On April 1st, 1955, a bomb went off in the dark outside the British Secretariat in Nicosia. And on August 16th, 1960, Cyprus was a free and independent republic. 5 years and 4 months. That is all it took. The men who fought in the Troodos Mountains were not professional soldiers. They were shepherds, students, teachers, farmers. They had no tanks, no aircraft, no artillery, no foreign sponsor, no safe territory to retreat to. They had the mountains. They had the loyalty of their people. They had a commander who understood that you do not need to defeat an army to win a war. You only need to make the cost of staying higher than the cost of leaving. And they had, above everything else, the absolute refusal to accept that their lives and their island belonged to someone else. There is a street in Nicosia today named after Grivas. There are monuments, there are school lessons and national commemorations and annual ceremonies on April 1st, where Cypriot children lay flowers at memorials to the fighters of EOKA. For Greek Cypriots, the struggle is not ancient history. It is living memory. Parents who were children during the emergency. Grandparents who remember the curfews, the checkpoints, the sound of distant explosions in the Troodos nights. And somewhere in those mountains, on paths that Grivas walked in darkness more than 60 years ago, paths that British soldiers searched and never quite managed to close, there is still the echo of what 300 people proved to the world. That size means nothing. That an empire can be brought down by the refusal to bow. That when a people decide, together, that they will not be ruled, that every farmer and priest and schoolchild and shepherd becomes part of the resistance. There is no military force on earth powerful enough to hold them. Britain sent 40,000 soldiers to an island. The island sent them home. Every like on this video keeps this story alive for the next generation. If it moved you, click it. Stories like this don't survive on their own. Someone has to pull them from the archives, verify every detail, and make sure they're never forgotten. If you want more of that work, subscribe. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. If you have Cypriot or Greek heritage, tell us. Did your family ever share stories from this era? We read every single comment. Thank you for refusing to let Grivas and the fighters of EOKA fade into obscurity. They stood their ground. You made sure history remembers.